Well, hello, everyone. Dr. Lisa Faast here, and I am excited to be talking with Greco from Live Oak Bank today. Now, you might be thinking, banking conversation is not exactly what gets you up in the morning, but trust me, I think there is going to be some amazing buying opportunities for pharmacy owners that are looking to grow, expand their locations, or even if you're a pharmacist, maybe you're even a pharmacy student and you're wanting to get into pharmacy ownership. I think 2024 and 2025 are going to be a buyer's market for pharmacies. Now, on the flip side, that is unfortunate because that means people are wanting to sell. Now, people sell for all different kinds of reasons. You know, it might be retirement time, they might have some other personal issues, or it could be because that they're struggling. And certainly there's going to be a lot of pharmacies that are struggling in 2024 because of the DIR fee apocalypse. That if you're not familiar with that, that is basically the change of how DIR fee payments are made. It's actually ultimately going to be a good thing once we go through the transition period, but the transition period is going to be very, very painful for pharmacy owners because it is going to greatly restrict cash flow. And trust me, you cannot keep a pharmacy open, frankly, any business open, if you have poor cash flow. And so, there's many experts out there, including myself, that maybe as many as 20% of independent pharmacy owners might have to make that tough decision to close their pharmacy. And I don't want independent pharmacies disappearing. I don't want pharmacy owners disappearing. And so I think it's really important to do everything that we can to not only save the ones that are out there, but also if you do need to sell for whatever reason, that you get sold to somebody else that's going to keep it independent. I firmly believe that independent pharmacies are the best places to get patient care. I think they're better working environments for the employees. And I think they're just a stable of a healthy, thriving community. And so I want to not only keep the ones that are there, but help them expand and grow and multiply. I'd love in a few years to be talking about 40,000 independent pharmacies rather than the 20,000, number that goes around now, which is why we are talking with Greco, as he is going to be going through the SBA changes, Small Business Administration changes on some of their different loan programs. And this is going to be important if you are thinking about maybe possibly purchasing a pharmacy, if you want to bring in a junior partner, get some fresh blood into your pharmacy. So Greco, I'm going to turn it on over to you. So let's start off. Let's first off introduce yourself and Live Oak Bank. Not everybody knows who Live Oak Bank is, even those you guys have been around and have been a friend of independent pharmacies for many years. And then we'll kind of dive into the changes that are happening that's going to make SBA loans, I think, a little bit easier for pharmacy owners to get.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, for having me on today. Happy holidays to you and to your followers. I know it's been a pretty crazy 2023 with everything that's going on. So looking forward to a good 2024. Yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes the banking conversations don't really get us up in the morning and get us excited, especially, given everything that's happened this year with 2024, 2023, and most specifically the conversation that's on everybody's mind, which are the big rate hikes that happened this entire year. I hope to be able to share some positive news that have been out there in the banking space. And thank you again for having us here. My name's Greco. I'm the Senior Loan Officer and Vice President of the Pharmacy Vertical at Live Oak Bank. And very simply, Live Oak Bank has been dedicated to being the pharmacy bank and helping independent pharmacies achieve their dreams of ownership or expansion, purchasing real estate, really anything financing that's out there. And as we look into the future, our mission statement at the bank is to be America's small business bank. And so we're here for small businesses all in. And that's very rewarding. And we're really excited that, over the last 10 years, we've been able to help a lot of independent pharmacists achieve their dreams. So that's kind of what gets me up in the morning, gets me excited, and really gets me excited for conversations like today.
Awesome. So some of the changes that we've talked about, we're going to talk about 3 SBA changes. Is if you are interested in pharmacy ownership, or maybe you're looking to expand, most of us will tap into the SBA at some point. I know when I opened my very first pharmacy from scratch, I went through the whole SBA process. I won't lie, it was very painful. It wasn't through you guys. And it probably would have been a different experience, but I didn't know what I didn't know back then. And And it can be confusing. I have other family members that have gone through the SBA process for, not for pharmacies, but for other businesses. And it can just be confusing. And I think it's really important that not only you go to somebody who's an expert in SBA,
Mhm.
but pharmacy, obviously, we always like being different. And so it's a kind of a different beast when you're talking about pharmacy loans. And so I think Live Oak is a really great marriage of SBA expertise and pharmacy expertise. So these changes in the SBA loan process, they're not specific to pharmacy. They're just changing the program.
Right.
However, because you guys, your vertical there that deals only with pharmacy, you guys are pharmacy experts, kind of filter it for us, these changes on like what it means and the kinds of examples that pharmacy owners might need to leverage these changes to help boost their business or maybe be able to sell their business and keep it independent.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are right. I think a lot of individuals, they're not aware of the SBA program. And really it is a niche program when you think about the actual banking world, right? I think a lot of people think about home loans, maybe some more conventional financing, commercial financing, and then the SBA, right? But for businesses that have a lot of goodwill and rely on cash flow, much like a majority of the small businesses, and frankly, pharmacy is exactly like that, right? The Small Business Administration loans are great, and banks can lend through this program. So the bank is loaning their own money. And the fact that Live Oak Bank is a preferred lender, we can do everything in-house so long as we follow these guidelines that are set out by the SBA, called the Standard Operating Procedure, or short SOP. Well, some of the material things that have changed in those recently is around equity injection requirements for change of ownerships. So very simply, when you go to purchase a business from somebody, there is a purchase price, and then there could be additional costs involved in the loan, like working capital, for example. So all those go into a big project cost, okay? And historically, 10% has always been the benchmark. So 10% of that total project cost is required to meet the equity injections. So really simple, let's say we have $1 million project cost, 10% of that's 100,000. So someone goes to apply for an SBA loan for a change of ownership to buy a pharmacy, $100,000 is the minimum 10% requirement that has to get in. Well, for a lot of people out there, $100,000 is a lot of money. Might as well be $1 million, right? And for someone who, let's say, has been working at a pharmacy for 10 years, maybe has built up a lot of sweat equity as a great employee, again, they may not have that. Well, so historically, that's kind of been a barrier to entry. I mean, and there's really only been one door for people to walk through. Well, what's so exciting now is these new changes that are now implemented and active is they've provided some flexible options for individuals to be able to meet that 10% requirement. And what we mean by that is maybe they don't have the full 10%. Maybe they have, let's say, 1 or 2%. Well, then the remainder of it can be made up with seller equity, meaning essentially a seller note. And that seller note can either be on full standby or partial standby, depending on how much the individual is coming in with. But what that means now is, in that scenario, let's say I've been a long-term employee of a pharmacy, putting in a lot of sweat equity, and there's a chance now for me to purchase the pharmacy, but I've always thought, man, I just don't have that 100,000. Well, now there's a great way that you can structure it, so long as the cash flow meets it, and as long as the bank, feels that it meets their lending guidelines, that now there's a pathway. So there's now this other door that people can walk through and achieve. And I think why that's so important is, if people don't know that, then that conversation of a change of ownership might never occur. And instead, the seller might think, well, there's only one option that I have: sell to a chain, or maybe even just close the doors, which frankly I've heard stories of. And so what really this is informational for people to know that, hey, there are these other pathways that I can take to ownership. So let's start the conversation.
No, I think you're spot on. Many independent pharmacy owners don't have, children or families to, pass the business on to. And so there's almost an adopted family member, if you will, that
Right.
long-standing pharmacist that's been there for 15, 20 years. And I've seen deals break down because that pharmacist didn't have the cash needed. You help build up, you're talking about $1 million, but many of these pharmacies, they've been built up over decades and they're worth
Yeah,
4 or 5 or 6 million
absolutely.
dollars. And so having 400 or $600,000 in the bank isn't something that just everybody has,
Right.
especially in a cash way to be able to put into the deal. And so I think this is really exciting. I think this is going to create a lot of kind of junior partnerships or joint ventures, where there's going to be an exit strategy that is really developed between a current pharmacy owner and a future pharmacy owner. And I think it's exciting. A lot of pharmacists are fed up, obviously, working with the big box stores. I think a
Mhm.
lot of students, at least at the universities that I speak at, I think a lot of students are interested in pharmacy ownership. And so, like you said, it just creates another door, which is just more flexibility, which I think is great for everybody. So, what are some other changes that are happening or have already happened actually with the SBA program?
Yeah, so on the subject of junior partnerships, like you just brought up, so historically, the idea of financing a partner buy-in has never been allowed to the SBA. So it's always been 100% change of ownership. So you either have to buy the pharmacy outright, like we were just talking about, or you can buy out partners, so like a partner buyout. But that partner buy-in has never really been allowed. And so a lot of people have had to finance that either with their personal monies, home equity lines of credit, or maybe even just getting in through like sweat equity over the years. Well, now a change in the SBA SOP states that a bank can finance a partner buy-in, and that's pretty important. So let's say, for example, you've owned your pharmacy for 10, 15 years. You feel like I've got some great ideas that I want to be able to inject into the business, but you're just not quite ready yet to fully ride off into the sunset. You want to retain 30, 40, maybe 25, 10, whatever the number is, right? Well, now I can get financing for that to be able to buy into that partnership. Now, there are some rules around post ownership percentages on who has to guarantee the loan, but that's why you always want to talk with an SBA lender to really understand what those rules are. But the very fact that you can now buy in, and there's some really great equity injection flexibilities with regards to meeting what the 10% equity injection requirements are on the actual purchase price. This is where it kind of differs from the 100% change of ownership. They're looking at equity injections on purchase price pro rata. So let's say I'm buying 80% of your business. It's on that 80%, not the total value. But it really gives some opportunities for people now to get in as, like you said, junior partnership or a joint venture versus, okay, my seller wants to sell or my owner wants to sell, but that's not for another 5 years. And frankly, I don't even know what might happen in 5 years. Gives another pathway. So we're talking about these other pathways to ownership where historically it's always seemed like it's just one door.
Yeah, I can see a lot of scenarios where, if you're a high quality employee, you want more than just a job. And I think that's
Right.
where a lot of these chain and big box pharmacists get really frustrated is they've given their blood, sweat, and tears. And, the big corporation, frankly, just doesn't care about them because it's, to their shareholders that they're beholden to. Whereas an independent pharmacy owner obviously runs their business different. If they have these rock star employees that have helped build up equity, and I can even see doing this where you're offering a group of employees, it's more than just one where, you kind of become an employee owned company, if you will. So I think it's exciting. It creates a lot of opportunity. You might be saying, hey, I'm in my 40s or 50s right now. I'm not really, like you said, ready to ride off into the sunset. I got another 10 or 15 years under my belt. And I don't want to carry the full burden of that on my shoulders. And so being able to reward, I'll say reward, but and being able to offer that kind of opportunity to your employees to be able to buy in at the pharmacy, buy in what it is now. And that way they get rewarded in more than one way. It's not just a job. They really truly are becoming owners. Because it can be, you don't have to be the pharmacist. It could be a technician, or it could be a manager or something like that, that really wants to turn this into their lifelong, kind of dream and whatnot. And it doesn't have to be 100%. And so it's really exciting, for someone who's looking at deals a lot with me and my partners of, looking at different pharmacies. It's exciting because I can see a lot of different structurings, whether you're coming in or you're going out. On both sides of that coin, it's beneficial. So if somebody's listening to this, then they're like, wow, this is getting my thoughts growing. What's the first step? What do they need to do? What do they need to do before they call you, before they call up Live Oak and say, hey, what's this? What should they do beforehand? Can you kind of help somebody through of like what that process might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's put this through the lens of what we would say our borrower, so our customer, right? So before you do that, before you give us a call, and you can always reach us on the web, www.liveoakbank.com. You can also reach out. I'll provide my information here in the chat here in a second. But I would say first and foremost, what you always want to do is first just have that initial discussion, perhaps with the individual that might be your seller. And let's say maybe it's just been in passing, where it's just like, hey, what are your thoughts about ownership? Well, that's good, because at least there's that conversation that's going on. Next, I would say everybody wants to have a good idea about what their credit score is. I personally, and this is not an endorsement, I just use Credit Karma. I kind of follow my credit just to know that there's no red flags and kind of have a general idea. I think that's just best practice for everybody. And then lastly, have a good understanding about, well, what does my personal balance sheet look like? My assets and my liabilities. And again, this is just very general and broad, right? I think everybody should be out there following you on LinkedIn, educating themselves as much as they can about what's going on in the industry, recent changes, challenges, and then also have a very good idea about why do you want to own, why do you want to make that transition from employee to owner, be it 100% or just a junior partner. And then pick up the phone, email, follow, whatever it is, and make sure that you're having a conversation with somebody that really understands this SBA and really understands pharmacy. And that's why I think it's so important to have conversations like this with us and with myself at Live Oak Bank, so that you can really talk to somebody who knows those two things. One thing that I will say is, with these changes, they're what's out there in the options, right, of the SBA. Now, if an individual talks to a bank, each individual bank will have their own credit criteria to the specific situation. So people have to remember that not every bank is going to say, well, yeah, they're the guidelines, but that's what we're going to follow. But if you don't have a conversation with someone that doesn't know these changes very well, like frankly, going sometimes to your friend who's the banker at the local regional, and they go, I don't know. I mean, usually you have to have X amount of collateral required. If you don't have that, then you're not getting the full list of options. And as we always like to say, the fine print that's involved with all of these types of loans.
Yep, I completely agree. I learned very much later after my SBA process that there is a difference between a preferred lender and just your local bank. Right. From my layman's terms, any bank can kind of tap into those guidelines of the SBA, but only the preferred ones are the ones that really make it their day job. And if you're talking about millions of dollars here when you're talking about a pharmacy, you want to go with somebody that knows every little in and out, every little fine print. You don't want a last minute snag to catch you up at the very end. And then because you guys know pharmacy, you guys know how to calculate working capital requirements. You guys understand the business. You know how to look at financials. You can actually save people. Sometimes when you tell people no, it's because you saved them from themselves and you saved them from a very bad deal because you know pharmacy. And so I think that's really important that if you're looking into getting into financing pharmacies, that you work with somebody who is that friendly banker that can kind of teach you the ropes, but also maybe point out some things that just you didn't see. And they really are an extra set of expert eyeballs on any pharmacy deal. I know I told everybody, well, have you called Live Oak Bank? Have you run the deal by them? You know, and that's kind of been my phraseology that I've used many, many times. So what are the best ways that somebody to reach out to you? Obviously, liveoakbank.com, and then you can click on pharmacy. But what are the ways that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, well, they can reach me through my email, which is first name greco.devalencia@liveoak.bank. And Lisa, if you'd like, I could type it up here in the chat here. They can call me on my cell phone, follow me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, and I'm going to be at all the trade shows. Really looking forward to attending Diversify RX this year in Texas. I think that's going to be great, so people can talk to me there in person. And you know, I think the great part about technology now is that no one can hide. You know, as long as you know my first name Greco, last name De Valencia, and Live Oak, you're going to be able to find me one way or the other. So that's
Yeah,
the great
even
thing.
if
There's
you
nowhere to
don't know how
hide.
to spell his last name, which I'll put in the show notes, Greco is still isn't very common. You type
Yeah, right.
Greco, and chances are this is the Greco that you're going to find. So yes, I look forward to seeing you at the Pharmacy Profit Summit in March, which is just a few months away. I think there's obviously going to be a lot of shakeup in our industry. I hope and pray that everybody that's possible out there stays in pharmacy ownership if they want to stay in pharmacy ownership. Fix your cash flow. That is the most important thing you can be doing as a pharmacy owner right now. I'll just kind of preach that for a moment. You can fix it. So many times people feel stuck and they feel like they can't do anything, but that is not the case. You can fix it. And please feel free to reach out to us, myself, Diversify RX. And if you do find yourself needing help, and if it is time to get out for any various of reasons, make sure you try to keep it independent. And there are now more ways to be able to do that. So thank you, Greco. I will see you soon. And thanks for sharing these updates.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, and look forward to having the next one talk about, which is really something exciting too that we're launching, which are going to be some smaller loans for capital growth, specific around these chain closures, which we've been hearing a lot about in the news. So look forward to the next conversation that we're going to have where we can talk more about that.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you.